It's something we all chase, something we all need.
On Friday, we learned the U.S. economy appears to be slowing down.
But do we really understand the power it holds?
Billionaire Elon Musk is offering a big cash prize to battleground state voters who signed a petition from his Trump super PAC. Critics say he's essentially paying people to vote.
Money isn't just paper or numbers on a screen. It shapes societies, fuels empires, and decides who holds influence. It can open doors or close them, build dreams or destroy them. Well, that's obvious because money is essential in our lives. We work to get paid. We study to get paid. And some people even marry to get paid. In summary, money is crucial to our survival. The days when one could live in a forest with no link to society are long gone. So if money is so important, there must be someone or something that controls it. That something is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the wealthiest central bank in the world, even wealthier than the famous big companies, the FA-ANGs combined. But did you know that the Federal Reserve is a partly private firm? This means that the Fed is independent from Congress and its policies. Sure, Congress can assign laws for the Fed to follow, but the Fed can also decide on certain monetary policies by itself. So, the central bank is a powerful institution, one that essentially controls the world by controlling the US dollar. But how? To understand how such a firm became so powerful, let's go back to 1913, where it all started. The Federal Reserve was established in response to a series of financial panics that highlighted the need for a more stable and secure banking system in the United States. The pivotal moment came during the Panic of 1907, which exposed the vulnerabilities of the banking system and led to widespread bank failures. In 1913, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act, creating the Federal Reserve System as the central banking authority of the U.S. The Fed was designed to provide a safer, more flexible, and more stable monetary and financial system. However, its creation has often been described as shady due to several controversies. The pivotal meeting that led to the drafting of the Federal Reserve Act took place in secrecy on Jekyll Island, Georgia, attended by a select group of powerful bankers and financiers, raising suspicions about the motives behind its establishment. Critics argue that the Fed centralizes too much power in the hands of a small group of bankers, potentially serving elite interests rather than the public good. Additionally, the Federal Reserve operates with a level of independence from the government, leading to concerns about its lack of accountability to the public. So we agree that the Fed controls the US dollar. But how does a single currency, the US dollar, hold so much power over the global economy? The Federal Reserve's control over the US dollar started with a vision to position it as the world's most influential currency. To achieve this, the Fed initially linked the dollar to gold, giving it a stable, tangible value. After World War II, the Fed and the US government promoted this gold-backed dollar as the backbone of a new, stable global financial system, a plan solidified through the Bretton Woods Agreement, which encouraged other nations to adopt the dollar for international trade and to hold it as a reserve currency. As countries began to rely heavily on the dollar for stability and growth, the Fed made a historic move in 1971 by cutting the dollar's link to gold.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
This left nations worldwide dependent on the dollar itself, with no alternative reserve asset of comparable strength or influence. Now, without gold anchoring it, the dollar's value was subject to the Fed's monetary policy, which the Fed manipulates through interest rates and other economic tools to maintain its strength or weaken it as needed. By controlling the dollar's value, the Fed wields significant influence not just over the US economy, but also over economies around the globe, shaping international trade, investment flows, and global financial stability. With control over the dollar and a global economy deeply reliant on it, the US has, at times, leveraged this power in ways that pursued its strategic interests but came at a tremendous human cost. During the Cold War, in particular, the US used its economic clout to support authoritarian regimes that aligned with its anti-communist agenda, regardless of the brutal consequences these regimes had for their populations. By manipulating dollar-based economic policies and controlling the flow of funds through institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank, the US provided financial backing and lenient loan terms to dictatorships in countries like Chile, Argentina, and Brazil. These governments, in turn, employed violent suppression tactics, including torture, forced disappearances, and extrajudicial killings, to maintain their power, which they wielded with the implicit support of US dollars and diplomatic backing. The 1980s Latin American debt crisis further illustrates how US economic control could inflict hardship on entire nations. Encouraged by the accessibility of dollar-based loans in the 1970s, many Latin American countries borrowed heavily for development projects. But when US interest rates sharply increased in the early 1980s, these loans became unsustainable, plunging these nations into debt crises. Under pressure from the US and international lenders, countries were forced to adopt severe austerity measures as a condition for new loans. These measures led to cuts in social programs, mass layoffs, decreased public spending, and a rise in poverty and inequality, destabilizing local economies and impacting millions. In countries that resisted US political influence, such as Cuba and Nicaragua, the US went a step further, implementing economic sanctions that restricted access to dollars and isolated these economies from the global market. The resulting financial strain contributed to shortages of essential goods, diminished public services, and forced populations to endure harsh living conditions. These tactics illustrate the darker side of dollar dominance, where economic power became a tool to enforce political agendas, often undermining sovereignty and leading to devastating social consequences. For millions across Latin America, the effects of these US-backed economic policies and interventions created generational hardships, reinforcing inequality and economic dependency across the region. Building on its history of influence, the Federal Reserve today stands as one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world, wielding immense control not only over the US economy but also impacting global markets and other institutions. Its policies shape everything from stock market stability to housing prices and foreign exchange rates, putting it in a unique position of influence over both private financial firms and national economies. For example, when the Fed implemented massive quantitative easing programs following the 2008 financial crisis, and again during the COVID-19 pandemic, it injected trillions of dollars into the economy, stabilizing major banks, propping up stock markets, and ensuring liquidity across financial systems. This intervention underscored the Fed's too big to fail (TBTF) status, as its support prevented large financial institutions from collapsing, even though they might have without Fed backing. The Fed also faces disruption from the rise of decentralized financial technologies and cryptocurrencies. Digital currencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum have gained traction as stores of value and mediums of exchange that operate outside traditional financial systems. Should a stable digital currency gain widespread adoption globally, particularly if it becomes used by nations or large corporations, it could challenge the Fed's ability to control monetary policy, as such a currency would operate independently of any central bank. Even central banks around the world, including the Fed itself, are experimenting with their own digital currencies, known as central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Yet if countries that perceive the Fed's dominance as a threat begin issuing CBDCs in an attempt to reduce reliance on the dollar, it could fragment the global financial system, effectively reducing the Fed's reach. Moreover, the Fed's too big to fail status, while powerful, is not invincible. A severe misstep, such as an inability to control runaway inflation or a policy that triggers a prolonged recession, could tarnish the Fed's credibility. If, for instance, the Fed's response to a future financial crisis is perceived as ineffective or favors large financial institutions at the expense of ordinary citizens, public trust could erode, leading to calls for sweeping reforms or a decentralization of its functions. Finally, shifts in global geopolitics and alliances could impact the Fed's authority. If countries increasingly turn to regional alliances and alternative financial systems, the centralized power of the Fed could face limitations. For example, a global economic shift toward regional trade blocs, or a pivot away from dollar-denominated trade in Asia and Europe, could dilute the Fed's influence, reshaping the global financial landscape in a way that limits US monetary policy reach.